And unfortunately, we don't have a quorum tonight, but we can still, I think we didn't have any real decision, kind of decision-making stuff to talk about tonight. So I think we can still proceed with the agenda as is. I think, I guess we've got, so we might as well start with Carly, let her kind of do her presentation first. I don't remember what the agenda was, what the order was there, but you may have, if you've been out walking down by the river, you may have noticed there's some new wayfinding panels down there, interpretation panels. And I'm actually really happy with the way those turned out. And that was a partnership with, we got a grant from Travel Oregon and to do some of the downtown wayfinding. And then we were able to use some of the money to work with the museum to actually develop those interpretive panels. So I want Carly to be able to talk a little bit about them. I am going to see if I can allow her to share her screen. Let's see here.
I should be able to do that on my own if that's, okay. I think Jason set me up. Here, give me a second.
I have seen lots of people checking out the interpretive signs already, so
right.
they've been a hit.
Okay, so I thought I would start off, just in case everybody hasn't had the chance to check them out, kind of showing the map of where they're located. I put this map together technically for when they were installing them, so because I might not have been able to be there. But you can see we've got one up by the athletic fields. We've got another one down by Riverview Park. We've got one at City Hall, and then there are 4 that are located at the library. So I'm gonna switch to the PowerPoint. Okay. So one of them we have by City Hall. It's about the Kalapuya Indians. It's just talking about their history in the area. We specifically picked that spot just because it was a really nice scenic location and it fits in with where the rest of them were. We picked all the topics for these just kind of on what made sense in the area. We were trying to go for more bigger overarching things. And the whole logic behind installing these wayfinding interpretive signs along the river path is that we wanted to accentuate all the history that was already in that area, but kind of put it where people already are. People don't always want to go into a museum. So if they're walking along, like having fun and walking along the river, they're probably more likely to take a second and read up on the history of the area that way. We're putting history where people are already congregating. And the next one, we have it up at Independence Park. This one's on the Independence ferries, and we specifically put that there up top because we knew more people were going to be walking by there, and so it was more likely to be seen by a wider number of people. But also, since C Street went down straight into docks, it made sense to kind of put that at the top of that. And then the next one we had was talking about the Independence hop camps. And that was kind of looking out over the riverbanks. We put that there because we do have some information that supports the fact that there were hop camps through that area during hop picking season. And so it made sense to include that information in that location. And so these are pretty equally placed throughout the walking path. And all of those interpretive panels were designed and made from scratch. So the other one that I'm excited about, because I go to the library fairly frequently lately, is that we have the Hops and Independence panels. So that was one panel that was, again, completely made from scratch. And whereas we talked about the hop camps before, the Hops and Independence panel is just talking about like hop growing and the history of it in the general Independence area. So it's more of a broad view, featuring some images that we have from our archive. And then the other 3 panels are actually historic newspaper articles from like the early 1900s that we already had those panels printed up. But because of this grant, we were able to kind of include them in there and use them to help flesh out that part. We specifically put them in front of the library and in front of the hop trellises because it connects to be able to have people see those hops growing right there. And that is that. Does anyone have any questions on those panels?
I would just make a comment that those newspaper ones are really cool. You know, I mean, they're like literal newspaper articles from, you know, the early 1900s. And it's fascinating to read them. And it's, you know, that's actually from an earlier grant project, you know, several years ago, but I've been wanting to get those up somewhere in town for a long time. So I'm really happy that we finally were able to.
Mhm.
I think it's great. Like I mentioned, I've seen a lot of people stop and look at the ones in the park and stop and actually take the time to read them and not just glance at them on the way by. So yeah, I'm excited to see that they're up.
Yeah, it'll be a nice resource for folks. I mean, the idea of bringing history to where people already are is a good way of putting that. As far as, you know, it's, don't try to sort of draw people to a new location. Just, you know, where are they already going, and just kind of put this stuff along the way. It's yeah, I mean, I guess it's sort of similar to what, you know, the library just put out that the story where they've kind of got signs, you know, with a story kind of broken apart. And this is, I think, a similar idea, but I mean, it's funny how it just kind of ties the walking path together to have a few of these signs, you know, kind of scattered along the way there.
No, I think these are amazing. I mean, they're beautiful, and they incorporate, I mean, just history into historic independence. So, Carly, thank you. Amazing job.
Thanks to Sean for getting the grant.
Oh, thank you, Sean, for getting the grant.
I think they turned out really great. I actually think they fit in really well with the signs on the pillars in the park too. So it's kind of a continuity, which is really quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the museum downtown too, it's kind of all kind of together. So that's really nice.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point to make. I think it's an exciting possibility to be able to, now that we are getting some of these interpretive signs out there, to maybe have a walking tour of the different interpretive opportunities centered on the museum, or something along those lines, where you know, you kind of you put enough of these out there and suddenly it becomes, you know, a visitor amenity, and you can do even more with it.
But it was actually really fun because I knew they were coming, but I didn't know where they were. So it was like this treasure hunt. Other people could have it as a treasure hunt, where you have kind of a little map to kind of find all the signs or find all the information.
So, Sean, while we have you, maybe you can answer my question. What's going on with the other wayfaring signs, the blue ones on the poles? I noticed the one over on B Street is still laying on the sidewalk.
I will ask Kai about that. My assumption with I've noticed this too. My assumption
I park right there, so
my assumption is that that's just kind of the very last part of finishing the project, is putting those back.
okay.
You know, those yeah, they will be going back one way or another. I can guarantee you that.
I wasn't sure if maybe it was an issue with our proposed sign code and font size for walking signs.
No, this was all about the ODOT project to replace the wheelchair ramps and all of those kind of things.
Got it.
You know, so they were removed for that.
Yes.
And then it's just, you know, it's a matter of, you know, they're already a month behind schedule, and so it's
okay. I just thought I'd ask.
It's a matter of making sure they tie up their loose ends.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts about the interpretive signs, or the downtown wayfinding generally? Awesome. Well, thank you, Carly. I appreciate you coming in to do this, and definitely look forward to continuing to work with you on future projects of similar and hopefully different projects as well.
Thanks for having me.
Definitely. Next on the agenda, I wanted to talk a little bit about street trees. The Parks Committee, you may or may not be aware, may or may not remember, is also the tree board, and we have a tree ordinance with the city, and is part of being a Tree City USA. Several years ago, we applied for designation as a Tree City USA. As part of that, we had to pass a tree ordinance and have a tree board. And the tree ordinance governs, I mean, the goal is basically to make sure that the city has kind of retains its existing tree canopy and works to expand, the tree canopy within the city. And the idea is, more trees equals more shading. You're reducing the heat island effect. You're obviously, helping clean the air with the trees and reduce carbon dioxide. And it's, those types of benefits, and it just makes it a better place to be. It's just making sure I'm not sitting here talking to myself on mute.
No, you're not. We would have said something by now.
It's like momentary. So as part of the tree ordinance, it largely deals with street trees. And we already, with our development code, when new subdivisions go in, when new streets are built, there's a required buffer and requirements for different, for having trees put in those buffers. And there generally tends to be some conflict between street trees and sidewalks with, homeowners are responsible for the sidewalks, and the street trees a lot of times will send out roots, lift up the sidewalks, and then the homeowners, of course, get unhappy because they have to fix the sidewalks. And there's concerns about whether it'll just happen again as those trees get older. We've gotten for whatever reason, we've gotten a flurry of requests to remove and replace street trees in the last week or so. And generally the ordinance requires that replacement of street trees or removal of street trees, each request comes to the tree board for review and approval. Generally, I think this makes sense for, kind of older, more, kind of more mature trees that really kind of have significant canopy spread. One of the things that has changed with our street trees in the last 10 years or so is we updated our public works design standards to require installation of a root barrier. So, 15, 20 years ago, if you built a subdivision, you would build a road, you build a buffer, and you would just plant trees in the buffer, and then the roots would be kind of free to go wherever they wanted. That obviously has a greater likelihood of the roots going under the sidewalks and lifting, and the road for that matter, and lifting things up and causing problems. What we now require is that a root barrier be put in, circular around the tree to a certain depth. And it's basically just an impermeable surface that forces the tree roots to go down, and down to a depth that they are less likely to turn around and come back up under a sidewalk, right, and kind of do that. So in looking at these several requests, they're generally for kind of newer street trees of kind of 10 to 15 years old. They're essentially been placed long enough that the roots are starting to get out under the sidewalks, right, and cause issues. On the one hand, I'm all for preserving canopy, and the old, it takes a long time for trees to get to that point, so there's value there. On the other hand, I think there's also kind of potential longer term value to replace those trees with with a new tree from our approved street tree list, with a required root barrier that hopefully will, right, present a longer term opportunity for those trees to grow and not cause problems. So my question to you all is whether you would have interest in me bringing you some draft language to update the street tree ordinance along these lines, to essentially say, if somebody wants to replace a street tree in front of their house with a tree from our recommended list, as long as it is, kind of less than a certain age, and we could say 20, we could say 50, it's, I think, it'd be up to you all to set whatever that age would be. But to essentially say that if it meets these certain criteria, then it would be approved as an administrative decision instead of having to come to the tree board. Right. And then if it was a 50-year-old tree or a certain size, we could even say, within a certain, diameter at, a certain diameter tree, then that would potentially come to the tree board for review, because it would be of a certain significance that merits a little extra oversight. So I guess I put that question to you all, and just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
I can say I've heard from some fairly vocal neighbors in the newer section of 7th Street. And I say newer because my home was built in 1944. So really we're talking from Cedar Court down. And even walking, I've noticed that several of those required trees the sidewalk is starting to lift. I've replaced my sidewalk due to my trees, but hey, they're beautiful and I wouldn't trade them for anything. But I guess, they've shared with me that essentially it is unfair that they have to replace the sidewalk for a tree that is mandated by the city. So I think this might be a good compromise. So we're not somehow on the hook. I don't know if they all decide to sue us for replacing a bunch of sidewalks down the road.
Jasper, I saw you getting ready to say something.
Oh, well, we've learned from prior board work that trees can be very controversial. And I guess my question was, so are we being presented with the information to make a recommendation to the city council, or?
Yes, yeah, this would be
reviewing it, and
essentially,
then city council would be making the ultimate decision.
yeah, so essentially I would bring language to you all. You all would say, we like this and we recommend the city council adopt this. And then it would go to the city council for a public hearing. And then if approved, the ordinance would be updated. Yeah, so there definitely would be opportunity for public comment and other folks to weigh in. And yeah, ultimately it would be the council's decision.
So we could have public comment for both our meeting and for the city council meeting.
Yes, yeah.
I think my only concern would be, people using it as a loophole. I don't like my street tree that I have outside, so I'm going to replace it just because I feel like it, and I'll find a little tiny crack in the sidewalk. So I don't know if we could put some sort of threshold of, you have to demonstrate that it's actually damaging your sidewalk, or to a certain extent, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think, yeah, let me think. I'll have to think about the right way to frame that. Because, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thought, is kind of what do you want the trigger to be? Because right now for all I know, these people who are requesting it could just be that, well, I don't like having that tree sitting there, so I want to replace it. And so on the one hand, I think we can say, we could potentially say, well, it's an arbitrary decision to want to replace it, but as long as it doesn't currently have a root barrier and the new one will, long term, that's a win. On the other hand, we could potentially limit it to, it's lifting the sidewalk, I'm going to have to grind it or otherwise repair the sidewalk. Therefore, I want to remove and replace the tree at the same time, and so that I don't have to do it again. I think I think that frankly that's the kind of decision I'd like you guys to guide me on.
Because I think there are also plenty of trees that are well behaved and aren't really causing any damage. And but I've also encountered the people that, I don't like this tree, it drops leaves on the sidewalk and then it turns slimy and it's slippery. And so you find that key word of, oh, it's a trip hazard, or in the future it's going to buckle the sidewalk. And it's kind of like, well, then let's wait for it to get to that point where it is actually buckling the sidewalk versus, we think it might in the future. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess, Jasper, how do you feel about that?
I think it'd be good to just look at different scenarios and see. I don't think there's no criteria that's going to be perfect ever. So there's always going to probably be something where even if it fits the criteria and the you're reviewing it, you may still want to have it reviewed by the tree board, and I think, you know, having that discretion will be, you know, essential no matter what, because I don't think we're going to get a perfect criteria. But it does make a lot of sense that if they're replacing the sidewalk anyway, that might be a little clearer about why they're maybe wanting to replace the tree.
Yeah.
What happens if you have, like, let's say in my yard on the private side, I have a tree that's damaging the sidewalk and I refuse to take my tree out, where I'm like, I mean, I guess you could come along and enforce and say you have to just keep replacing the sidewalk then.
Yeah, I mean, that then is a pretty, I think is a pretty clear, you know, if the sidewalk becomes a trip hazard that gets reported and turned, you know, moved into the enforcement process, we can theoretically force a property owner to replace the sidewalk or repair the sidewalk. And then it's up to them whether they want to, you know, do something about the tree that's causing the problem.
Well, this is kind of outside the scope, but I mean, there's a lot of inequities with sidewalk repair and replacement in terms of how trafficked your street is and what trees were there and what people can afford and what people can't afford. And, you know, like I know in Corvallis, you know, they kind of added it to the water bill where it's, you know, the city's responsible for replacing the sidewalk. And so I don't know how far we'll get, but, you know, resolving all the inequities of sidewalk replacement might be challenging. Anyway.
Yeah, I know. And for what it's worth, the sidewalk repair program it is going to be coming back this summer. We're working with Community Services Consortium, and it looks like they are going to be able to have a crew of kids working on sidewalk repair projects. You know, so the homeowners will, you know, basically will be paying for the cost of the cement, and then the kids are going to be doing the work kind of like it was before. You know, we're not advertising it because frankly, what we're doing is we're taking our list of sidewalks that people have complained about and essentially reaching out to those property owners and said, hey, here's an opportunity. And then if we don't end up with enough projects out of that, then we're gonna reach out to the general public. Because yeah, I definitely recognize repairing sidewalks can be quite expensive. So, and even just the cost of cement is a pretty significant amount for, you know, for a house that has any kind of frontage on it. So, but yeah, I think, you know, it's worth at least considering, you know, kind of in terms of the, you know, we're talking street trees. So, you know, kind of figuring out what is the right trigger for this, and what are kind of those longer term ramifications, you know, for the homeowners and for other people in the community. So I guess what I'm hearing is you maybe want a couple of different options. One's maybe like a more liberal interpretation of, you know, essentially just if you want to replace it, you can replace it under these circumstances. You know, and then the other one would be maybe a more dialed in of, you know, it has to be, you know, it can only be replaced if it's causing a specific, you know, specific problems or other types of or some type of a more specific situation.
It'd be helpful to know just kind of when you think it's obvious and when you think it isn't. And, you know, that we can kind of, when it's pretty obvious, and it seems obvious, then try to not necessarily bring all those to the tree board, but, you know, I'll also allow for discretion for when it isn't obvious.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's tough because technically, I mean, if the I forget exactly what the definition is, but if the sidewalk is lifted, I think it's more than a half an inch, and it might even be a quarter of an inch. I mean, it's a very small amount that meets the criteria for being a trip hazard. You know, so if we're going to do something like that, that's probably the way that I would frame it. Is essentially if the homeowner can show that it's lifting the sidewalk, you know, by more than a quarter inch, where you've got an actual vertical displacement of more than a half an inch, that would then become a trigger where this, you know, and of course the street tree does not currently have a root barrier or something in its, you know, other you know, kind of criteria, then that would essentially kind of trigger the potential replacement. Does that kind of meet the intentions or the thoughts here?
That makes it seem even simpler than I thought it would be.
Well, and this is the tough part is, we always want to have discretion, but discretion is the enemy of these kind of decisions. We try to write it, and obviously this is not a land use type of a situation, but you try to minimize the amount of discretion because that then you have clear and obvious criteria, which makes it easy to say yes or no. And then the less clear stuff gets brought to you guys. That's kind of the way it works is, if it's an administrative decision, I take clear criteria to you all and say, are you, if it meets these criteria, I'm going to say yes. And then if you guys say that's okay, anytime it meets that criteria, I'm going to say yes. And if it doesn't, or if it's kind of squishy, then I'm going to bring it to you all.
Maybe getting,
Go ahead.
this may be getting in the weeds a little too much, but I'm assuming there's also times where the tree on one person's property affects the sidewalk on somebody else's property.
It's possible. I mean, in theory, the way they're supposed to be laid out in terms of the subdivisions and everything, it shouldn't be that close. It should be far enough that it wouldn't be causing that kind of an impact. But it's, that is always a possibility. But in that case, and I'd have to think about this, but ultimately it's the homeowner's responsibility to replace the tree, same as replacing the sidewalk. So it would, if anything, it would have to be the neighbor complaining about the sidewalk being lifted because of this tree, and then that homeowner would have to agree to replace it. They would have to be the ones requesting the removal.
I know that from a council perspective, it's always really nice when you come to us just with something really clean, that, an existing tree minus a root barrier that is impacting the sidewalk so as to create a trip hazard as defined in ...
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those things are just, there's, it's not subjective. It comes to us, it's clean. And the city's on a roll with nice, clean code lately. So
Yeah.
I like that path. And I know that from our standpoint, it makes it easier. And I think the public is typically more satisfied with those kinds of very clear-cut codes.
And would this just be kind of tree impact on sidewalks, or would it be other potential dangers from trees as well?
I think I think it would be up to you all to make that determination. We'd be talking specifically about street trees. So and you're right. In general, the reason people want to remove street trees is because of sidewalk issues, or they just don't like. Yeah, they don't like raking. They don't like whatever the things are. But I think
Welcome to a tree city.
yeah. But I think it'd be worth considering if you want to sort of tie it specifically to sidewalks, or if you kind of, I'm not even quite sure what the other kind of rationales would be. Sidewalks are the most obvious, sort of like it's a safety issue. I think
Right.
there's a chance of like the branch is too low and will poke somebody in the face, but then you just trim the branch. You don't necessarily have to remove.
Right, and you are
remove the
responsible
tree.
for pruning your trees to, I think, 10 feet above the street and 6 feet above the sidewalk or something like that.
Yeah, there is a definition in the existing tree ordinance about how high up it has to be pruned. So and like I say, that's a fairly straightforward. Well, the solution is to prune the tree, not to take the tree out.
Right.
Although, like I say, if you all want to allow that as a criteria for removal, and who knows, maybe the tree got cut off, when it was young, and so it's one of those ones that's scattering out there. We can. But I guess I would kind of consider that to be a gray area that I would just say, well, let's go talk to the Parks Commission and they can decide whether that's a valid reason or not.
Is there a separate section, and I apologize, I don't know this off the top of my head, for like hazard trees? Like if you have a tree that's diseased and
Yes.
dropping branches and that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, hazard trees, and I'd have to go back and look at the exact criteria, but yeah, hazard trees can definitely, there's already, an allowance to be able to remove those. And if it is a street tree, it would just have to be replaced. Yeah, and honestly, that's the other thing is we have updated our street tree list. Our previous street tree list allowed things like Douglas fir and sequoias and big leaf maples, and just didn't quite. I'm not quite sure where that list came from, but so yeah, we have updated it to allow for more appropriate street trees. And I should say there is actually a small subdivision off of it's a duplex subdivision off of Ash Street there. I think it's called April Dawn Court or something like that, but it's a little dead end cul-de-sac, and they put in Douglas fir as street trees. And it's one of those things, they put it in, and the public works were like, no, you can't do that. And they're like, well, it's right here on the list. So we had to say it was okay.
You're ready to trim those limbs up later.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So yeah, I expect at some point we'll probably be getting some complaints about a few of those trees. So anyways, so it sounds like that's kind of what you all are looking for. Is maybe I'll bring you a couple of different kind of alternatives in terms of language to consider. One that's kind of triggered around sort of sidewalk or other type of hazard conditions, and one that's a more kind of a broader, just kind of, well, I just want to, and it'll add value just by, allowing, the tree root or the root barrier to be put in place. And then we can talk about that maybe at the next meeting that we have. Sound good? Excellent. So the only other thing I had on the agenda was just kind of a general kind of conversation information about, kind of COVID-19 in the parks, and especially with, looks like Polk County is going to be moving to phase 2 starting tomorrow. Just so you all know what, kind of where things have been, and then especially what's going to be happening, in the next, with the move to phase 2. So, obviously the playgrounds have been closed. We had closed the biker boater campground. Gosh, excuse me. The dog park actually has been open. The mayor was just telling me that there was signs there saying it was closed, but it's at least supposed to be open.
Well, it's the little red and white signs that are posted everywhere that just like list.
Oh,
They're not like, I don't think they're specific to Independence.
Yes.
I think they were probably like, a one-off, here's your COVID signage for all the cities. And it has dog parks in there, but they have never locked the gates at the dog park.
Yes. Yeah. We have never intended to close the dog park.
Right.
And then of course, obviously the walking paths are still open. We've just, we've got signage up saying, please stay 6 feet apart.
Right.
With move to phase 2, there's going to be some loosening. We are going to reopen the biker boater campground. We're opening the permanent restrooms, so the ones on Main Street and the ones down at the boat ramp. We are opening those. They're going to be cleaned more regularly. We're opening them because we feel confident that we're able to get them on a cleaning schedule that will ensure a reasonable level of safety. The porta potties they're going to remain closed. Hopefully not for too long, but we're essentially trying to figure out how we can get those things cleaned on a frequent enough basis to meet the governor's criteria. We know that's going to be a problem as this nice weather comes.
Parents at Riverview by the playground, yes, trying to get their little ones up the hill.
Yeah, so I know Kai he's working with our portable toilet vendor, and we're frankly probably going to have Larry, the camp host at the biker boater campground. He may just end up being becoming a toilet cleaner, and making regular rounds to the portables and cleaning them in some way. that meets the guidelines as well. But if anybody asks you, that's why we haven't opened them yet. Is it's we can't
Thank
we
you.
cannot yet meet the governor's recommendations on how those types of things can be treated. We are going to be it's funny because this whole opening the playgrounds thing came as a surprise to all of us. I read about it in the Oregonian, and it's still not on the governor's webpage or the OHA webpage or any of that kind of stuff. And I didn't, I've gotten every press release from the governor's office about every stage of this reopening, and I did not get that press release saying that the playgrounds were going to be reopened. So regardless, we're now obviously moving towards that as well. I don't actually, I'd have to ask Kai if we're planning on opening the playgrounds for this weekend or not, but under phase 2 playgrounds will be allowed, and communities may kind of offer hand sanitizer and things like that. It's going to be a balancing act. I think hopefully parents are going to hopefully self-select a little bit as far as what feels comfortable and what doesn't, because that's definitely going to become a gathering place, and there's only so much you can do to keep that place really kind of clean, as far as COVID goes. Aside from that, I think that about covers our park stuff. Obviously, the sports fields are still, the governor is still kind of working on trying to figure out, kind of formal recreation in terms of soccer games and things like that. There is some easing in that regard, and since we already, we don't have a formal recreation program anyway, so I think we're just going to kind of treat that as a gathering, and as long as there's not, under phase 2, we're allowed up to I believe it's 100 to maybe even 250 people. So as long as it's a pickup soccer game, I don't think there's going to be any trouble with that, as they're kind of playing at their own risk kind of a situation.
Yeah.
Any questions or thoughts on that kind of thing?
I saw that Polk County was one of the counties that was listed as kind of required for masks and face coverings. Is that just for indoor spaces, or is there anything?
Indoor public spaces.
Yeah, so as I understand it, it is, it's indoor public spaces, but that does include like grocery stores and shops and things like that.
Right.
It is also, if I read it right, it's also for outdoor spaces where 6-foot distancing cannot be accommodated.
Oh,
I was wondering especially about the farmers markets, because those were kind of seen as grocery stores.
Yeah.
So those be required to have masks?
That's a very good question. I know, the farmers markets kind of have their own criteria that was created to allow them to open under phase 1. And so I don't know if that's kind of considered good enough or not. I think, when you think about coverings are required, face masks are required when you cannot, maintain 6-foot, distancing outside. I could see a farmer's market being the kind of place that, if you get enough people there, it's going to be hard to stay 6 feet apart from everybody. So, I don't, we'll have to talk to every place is going to have to kind of figure out their own solution to this. And I think, it's going to be one of those things we're going to have to kind of play by ear, frankly. When you think about it, in theory, if you're playing a soccer game, you should probably be wearing a face mask, because you're probably going to be closer to 6 feet to somebody.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the reality is we're all doing the best we can and just trying to figure out how to work within the current situation. You're recognizing, of course, that the current situation could change next week, and then we'll adapt and work with that current situation.
Yeah.
So yeah, the other piece of this is, obviously, the local police department are the ones who are technically charged with enforcement of these rules. Our police department will be taking very much an advisory role, shall we say, as opposed to an enforcement role, at least in the early stages. And I think it's one of those situations that, as long as people aren't being jerks about whatever the situation is, I don't expect to see a lot of, tickets getting handed out, so to speak. So, I mean, I think that about covers it. I mean, if you guys have questions or thoughts on anything else, parks related or otherwise, I'm happy to talk about it.
Question, I guess, in terms of, I mean, obviously, like 4th of July has been largely tabled, or will be dramatically different. And I would imagine the city, like if a private group came up and said, hey, we want to rent out the park,
Yeah.
that it would be, I mean, I guess, if they promise there's only going to be 50 people there, I guess that's one thing, but I don't know. I guess it even, like, I guess it brings up even the question of the demonstration this weekend, in the sense of, does the city have liability for sort of approving some of these events? And if, say, 500 people, 1,000 people show up?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. Right for now, we're essentially taking the approach of just saying, look, here, this is what the criteria allows, with phase 2, restrictions. You're responsible for making sure your event, falls under that and meets those restrictions. Kind of like I said before, I don't think there's going to be a lot of real, kind of, counting every single person out there, but at the same time, yeah, we do expect anybody who's going to rent the amphitheater to put a good faith effort on. I mean, and of course, if somebody came in and said, yeah, I want to put on a Garth Brooks concert with 20,000 people, it's like, all right, you should probably think about doing something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was, I mean, honestly, we kind of were talking about this because there was a bunch of events scheduled in June. And, we kind of were going, well, is it on us to tell them they can't do it? Or is it, is it on them to recognize the situation and make the decision for themselves? And fortunately, we kind of took a wait and see approach, and each of the events made the correct choice and said, look, it doesn't make sense for us to put on this event. So we're going to cancel it. And we didn't have to get to that point.
Right.
Hey, you kind of hate to see it get to a point where, almost like some of the grocery stores are doing, where it's like, all right, your event has to be fenced and you have to regulate people in, people out, and you can only have a maximum of, whatever the governor's orders are. And then it becomes incumbent on them to police that. I guess I would, in some respects, that's kind of the easiest way of saying, you're required to do this, and you have to have people stationed in and out and count and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah, and I mean, the reality is, for this summer, I think it's safe to say big events are done. And I think even if somebody wanted to have a big event, I think from a business perspective, you cannot have any confidence that you're actually going to have a good enough turnout to really make it worth your while. So I'm cautiously hopeful that when you think about a 250 person limit, that's a good sized birthday party or family barbecue or something like that. I mean, there's the kind of events that are going to be happening this summer should be able to fall under that restriction. And then, like I say, it's kind of going to be an honor system where we just have to kind of look at them, and get a straight faced answer of whether we think this really is a sort of a more of a neighborhood type of a thing versus a, we're inviting everybody from the whole region. And if it is looking like it's going to be, yeah, we're going to be having all these people come, we'll have to have a pretty frank conversation with whoever's proposing it.
I was wondering if there was going to be any kind of intersection or role for the Parks Board with the Transportation Services Plan, just because some of that does involve kind of bike trails and walking trails and connection of natural spaces. And so I don't know, was that something we were going to either have some role in or talk about? Or...
Well, so I mean, I guess, yeah, that honestly, I hadn't thought about it. I mean, you guys are definitely encouraged. I would encourage you to participate, individually and as Parks Committee members. I mean, if you think it's worthwhile to have some type of a Parks Committee meeting, or kind of focusing or talking about some certain aspects of that, I'd be happy to do that. We can see, again, kind of the advantages of the current situation. It's one thing when your consultant has to drive down from Portland or whatever to staff a meeting. It's another thing when they just have to hop on it from their office. So we very well could potentially have the consultants talk to the Parks Board. What I guess we want a little more information on kind of what you want to talk about, or what you're sort of interested in providing some feedback on.
It just seems like there were lots of kind of options for kind of either multimodal paths, kind of through parks, or kind of connecting parks, through paths, or and also just kind of how the parks are part of the transportation system, even with cars and other things, or even options of connecting our Riverview Park downtown with Monmouth, or so and how would that impact the park if there was transportation going there, bus or something. So it just seems like there might be intersections between kind of the parks and natural spaces and how people are moving through them.
Yeah, well, it definitely is. That is I'd say a priority of this plan, because obviously we've got Monmouth Street, which is kind of the main connection, east-west, and Hoffman, but Monmouth Street, 20 years from now, Monmouth Street is going to be pretty choked out in terms of traffic. And so we need to come up with alternatives to, as the population grows, how do we get people moving east to west and, into, through Independence and Monmouth. And yeah, you're right. The parks are going to, trail systems and parks are going to be an aspect of that. So yeah, if you guys think there's value, at the very least, I'm sure I can get Fred Evander, our planner, to be at the next meeting, in July, and just talk about, what's going on with the plan, and just, essentially, yeah, like I say, to kind of talk with you about it, talk about kind of the bicycle aspects and pedestrian aspects and transit, and connect, kind of connecting points, and just kind of see where to go from there.
And connecting the kind of trail system along the river eventually to the bridge, and for bikes and pedestrians, and there just seems like there's lots of possible intersections.
Yeah, definitely. Kate, did I see you saying something?
No, just agreeing. I think it would be good to be able to have the Parks Commission be able to give comment on that, or at least definitely stay in the loop on what some of those alternatives are and some of the discussion points, because it's been brought up that it needs to be more than just cars being taken into account. And there actually have been quite a few discussions about, the trail connections and safe bike paths and connectivity to all of that. And especially as we're promoting downtown events, you think about 4th of July celebration, and we're promoting for people to walk and bike to those to alleviate some of the parking. And so it behooves us to make sure that we have some sort of safe transportation to get people there. Non-motorized transportation. So, yeah.
Well, and while we're talking about this, I'll mention we're having our kickoff meeting for the Trolley feasibility study in a week and a half. So that the idea of linking Independence and Monmouth with with some type of transit service. So that's going to be gearing up as well. So I will keep this in mind with those conversations as well, and see if there's an opportunity to, like you say, kind of talking about linking Riverview Park with Main Street Park in Monmouth or something like that. There's it's right on the way.
Yep.
So John, has a consultant been selected for the study?
Yes, Walker Consultants.
Oh, good.
Sorry, for the transit one, right? The trolley you're talking about?
The trolley, yeah, the trolley. Yeah.
Walker Consultants.
Good.
Yep. Yeah, we just rejiggered the outreach plan because of distancing and all that kind of stuff.
How did they get a lot of, switching back to the transportation system plan? Did they get feedback from in the virtual open house or?
I've been meaning to catch up with Fred about that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I did I mentioned to him, I was curious to hear how that went in terms of participation. What, I got on there and I left a couple comments, and it didn't seem like there was a lot of like,
Yeah.
there were sort of the maps where you could put, a pin and make a comment. It didn't seem like there was a lot on there when I did it. I think I did it fairly early in the process.
Okay.
Also, the Climate Action Task Force was interested in the trolley, so there might be some people on that who might be interested in.
Yeah, I think we're going to be looking to pull together a little bit of a steering committee or advisory committee to work on that. So I think that would be helpful to know. Any other questions or thoughts or issues to surface?
I'm good,
I'm good.
but I'm just listening anyway, so in theory.
You're talking a lot for somebody who's listening.
Yeah.
It's nice to see the sun out. Speaking of parks and recreation, it feels like,
Yes.
and actually I've seen what seems to be more people. And Jasper, I see you making the loop on the riverfront trails. I mean, I just feel like more people are families and people on bikes and walking dogs, and it just seems like that trail system is getting really well used.
It seems like with people staying home, it just kind of got people in the habit of going for walks. I was like, that was the only thing you could do, so you went for a walk. And yeah, I definitely see it in my neighborhood. Just seems like there's a lot more people out and about.
And also lots of picnics, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know I'm a nice Oregonian shade of red right now. Sun comes out and everybody gets burned.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't get to have the public event, but the Peace Ginkgo is in at Inspiration Gardens, and they've done a really nice job of the path along Ash Creek in Inspiration Gardens.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a really nice path that goes along the creek there now, and I was wondering if there was any kind of update on Sunset Meadows, or kind of what that path eventually would connect to.
Yeah. So yeah, they've been working out there. We bid the project, awarded a bidder. They've done all the rough grading and kind of preliminary stormwater work, and they will be, by the end of summer, the path should be in place. So it's really going to just be the grading will be done, the concrete path will be in, stormwater improvements will be in, and then it'll just be a kind of a basic, seeded with grass. But that's going to be done, should be done by the end of summer. And if you go by there, it's all roughed in already. Like you can see where the path is going to go and all that.
Nice.
Any more? I know not all of the neighbors were happy that was going to be going in. Has that died down a little bit, maybe, or?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything else about that. Honestly, I imagine, I think the path was not a particular issue. If anything, it was a playground.
Yeah.
The potential for noise and that type of thing. But yeah, I have not heard any more from any of the neighbors there.
Good.
Kids versus dogs, I think.
Yeah, there'll still be plenty of room to throw a ball for your dog, even though you're supposed to keep your dog on a leash. Well, if that's it, I'm happy to let you guys go. Go get out and enjoy the last of this nice day.
Yeah.
Thank you. It was good to meet and get caught up on some of this. So
Yeah, and I guess actually a question for you all: do you want to have a meeting in July, or you want to wait till August?
You have things for us to meet about, or?
I should be able to have language turned around for the street tree thing by the July meeting. And then I'll have to check with Fred about the, the TSP and then this transit thing, if it'll be some, at a point that makes sense to come and talk to you all or not. That probably would be something that could either, essentially, I don't think there's anything super pressing, but we could easily do something. We would easily have enough for an agenda.
Yeah, I don't think I can make it in July, but you're welcome to meet without me, of course.
All right. Well, maybe we'll see how it's progressing, and then I'll kind of maybe do a poll and see who would be able to make the meeting, and then we can make a call then. Because I definitely recognize it's difficult to capture Oregonians in the summer.
Yeah, like herding cats.
Uh-huh.
And thank you for the presentation, Carly. It's great to have those signs up.
Thank you for your support, everybody. It's been fun.
Definitely.
Yeah, looking forward to the museum being downtown. That'll be great.
Mhm.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Me too.
Well, great. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate you taking the time, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time, if not before.
Yeah. All right.
Have
Have a
fun,
good evening.
guys.
All right. Take care.